All right, good morning, everybody. My name, again, like Daniel said, my name is Eric Trageser, and I'm product manager at Corbis Motion. And I'm really glad to know that there are all these Corbis photographers who are interested in making the transition from shooting stills to shooting motion. I understand we've got about 40 or 50 of you listening today, which is a really excellent turnout. There's a few things I'd like to talk about before we start. One thing to really remember is we're not going to be discussing what you already know. You are all professional photographers who are making your money shooting stills. You already know most of what you need to know to make this transition. For some of you, it may be mysterious. Shooting motion, for some of you, it might be second nature. But you already know most of what you need to know. So we're not going to be discussing photography basics like ISO and shutter and how to do the things you already know. This is not a seminar on time lapse. We will not be discussing that. There are a million forums out there on the internet. This is geared more towards cinema style motion. And as I said, you're an audience of pro stills photographers. You know what you're doing. My background is I came up the ladder as a commercial cinematographer here in Los Angeles. I've been shooting commercials for 10, 12 years. Worked with a lot of production companies and a lot of advertising agencies. And I've also been a cinematography lecturer at the American Film Institute here in Los Angeles. So my background is entirely in cinema, entirely in motion. So what that means is you know more than stills than I do. So as we go through this, I may say things in regards to shooting stills that you know are not right and you disagree with. Please remember where I'm coming from and cut me a little slack if I happen to make a mistake or two about stills shooting technique or stills technology. So another thing to remember, Corbis is a company, we are camera agnostic. Before we did this seminar, we sent out a poll and got a huge response asking people what they wanted to know. And one of the things we learned when we polled all of you DSLR shooters, this is one thing we learned. About 3/4 of you were shooting with Canon cameras, about a little over 20% are shooting with Nikon cameras, and we really do not care. We are interested in the final quality of the images or video that you send to us. So we do not have a particular axe to grind with this camera or that camera. You will hear me during this presentation refer a lot to certain Canon cameras, 5D Mark IIs and Mark IIIs and whatnot. The only reason I'm doing that is because you've told us that that's mostly what you use. If it was the other way around, I'd be talking about a different camera. So here's some other interesting information about all of you other people out there. In our poll, we found out that just a little over 1/3 of you have made money doing a hybrid motion stills shoot. So fully 1/3 of you have made money shooting motion already. I put this up here just to sort of give you an idea of how we've tried to gauge this talk. As you see the second point, there's been 15% of you who've been paid to shoot motion only. So 15% of you are actually full-on cinematographers who have done motion shoots and gotten paid for it. Now, 2/3 of you not only have not yet been paid to shoot motion, but another stat is 25% of you have shot no motion at all. So we have quite a broad range here. We have some people who are really just beginning to dabble, some people who have shot personal projects, a good chunk of you who have made money doing it, stills and motion at the same time, and some of you that have done all, or have done motion-only shoots. So as we put this presentation together, we tried to sort of aim for the middle. Sometimes some things I talk about may be way too technical. Some things I talk about may be too dull for some of you. So please remember that you're in a very broad group of people, and if this presentation is a little is maybe slow at times or too technical at times, please just flow with us. So on the other hand, I am not camera agnostic. I have been shooting for quite a while. I've used lots and lots of different camera systems, and I've got opinions about which ones I like, and they're going to slip out. And you may disagree with them, and that's cool. We'll both be right. So just know that I bring my own past and my own history and my own preferences to the table during this. So if you disagree, it's all good. And I will also be giving you, and this is important, a page of takeaway links at the end of this, so that every particular piece of equipment I've referenced, or perhaps video clips I've referenced, you'll be able to look at that takeaway clip, that takeaway sheet afterwards, find links, and go find the various pieces of equipment that we discuss. All right, so with that in mind, let's get rolling. we're going to be breaking this talk into two parts. The first, 20, 25 minutes, maybe half hour, is going to be looking at shooting motion from a technical point of view, starting from the base of what you know about stills and working outwards from there, and talking technically, what can we do about, what can we learn about how video is actually shot with these DSLR cameras, what's going on inside the camera, where some problems may lie, and what you can do to improve the technical quality of your images. We will then devote the second half of the talk to discussing creatively what can we do to make our images stronger, more attractive, more fitting a mood, and particularly focusing on how to move the camera. So we're going to want to understand technically some things about how the DSLR acquires its image, something about the codecs that the camera is using to record, using certain camera functions and camera information windows in order to improve how we shoot, and also some peripherals and pieces of equipment that may get you into more cinema shooting mode. So once again, some of this part I'm about to launch into may be too technical for some, not technical enough for others, but please just bear with us. So this commercial is a Molson beer commercial that was shot about 3-4 years ago by Bruce Dowad, a commercials director here at Believe Media in Los Angeles, a very big, prominent commercials company. Bruce is a veteran director. He's been shooting and directing commercials for a long, long time, using large cinema setups, basically all the big tools that you'd see on large commercial productions. And, around 2007, 2008, when the DSLR revolution really started kind of kicking into gear, Bruce really sort of went back to his documentary roots and was one of the first people to really grasp hold of the 5D Mark II as a cinema shooting tool. So I picked this spot because this spot here is entirely shot with a 5D Mark II circa 2008, 2009. It's a good object lesson. We're going to be referring to this commercial several different ways. We're going to watch it 4 or 5 times, and we're going to watch it from a technical point of view. We're going to watch it looking for certain things, and we're also going to be watching it creatively as well. And I picked it also because I know the visual effects supervisor, a guy named Matthew McManus at Kilt, is a friend of mine who did the post work on this spot, and told me that it's basically an untouched video. What they did was they did a little bit of treatment to smooth out some grain and smooth out the look, but a lot of the basic artifacts that were in it, the video artifacts and video problems that were in it still remain, and he was able to tell me all about that. So first, we're going to be a little bit picky, and we're going to watch this spot through and notice. Just give me your impressions. Notice everything that sort of seems technically wrong with it. So play it through one more time from the beginning, and just watch and notice technically what jumps out at you. You're going to notice a lot of jiggling of images, a lot of shaking. There's a certain amount of it that's handheld, but there's certain video artifacts and overexposure and stuff that we'll be talking about. So, okay, go ahead and pause, and let's switch and let's keep going and talk a little bit about what's happening in video. So, when you're recording video with your camera, you're shooting with a codec, in the same way that a JPEG is a way to compress an image down to a smaller size. In video, we've got them too, and a codec basically stands for compressor-decompressor algorithm. It's merely a way to take 24 pictures in a row, squeeze them down to the smallest file you can visually accept for your purpose, for distribution or editorial, and that the processors in your camera and processes in your computer and the media cards can actually handle. And again, this might be a little techie in nature for some of you. I've tried to sort of tell a very simplified version of this. But that's what codecs are doing. So how exactly are codecs compressing video? When your camera's taking 24 images a second and turning it into a video stream, how's it actually doing it? This may get a little technical, but it's important stuff to know. The first way that some codecs compress video is what's called all I frame. I stands for interframe or intraframe. And it works like this. Every individual frame, frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, frame 4, are all individually compressed on their own. The codec will look at the first frame, compress it, look at the second frame, compress it, look at the third frame, compress it, etc., etc., etc. These types of codecs were designed with editing in mind, because you don't ever know until you're in editing where you're going to make your cut. So you need each frame to stand on its own independently. Now that is as opposed to an IPB, or group of frame codec, which compresses video this way. It takes one frame, an iframe, or what's sometimes called a keyframe. And then what it'll do is it'll look at the next frame and compare what's different between this frame and the keyframe. And it will only save what's different, the difference between frame 2 and frame 1, and then frame 3 and frame 1, and then frame 4 and frame 1. And then at some point it'll take a new keyframe and do this process all over again. So what's great about that is that allows you to really substantially shrink the file size. This is great for when you're trying to send video over like your cable TV box or something like that, when you're trying to transmit signals through narrow bandwidth. This type of compression, this group of frame compression, is what's going on in a 5D Mark II using its H.264 codec, which we'll talk about in a minute. But these are the two different types of codecs, iframe codecs and IPB, or group of frame codecs. And we'll talk about how they affect things. All right, the next thing to talk about, and again, you're stills photographers and shooting the digital stills world, you'll know this, that when you're shooting digital stills, the bit depth of your system really matters. When you're shooting Canon RAW stills, you're shooting in a 14-bit space. That means you've got quite a few shades between black and white in each of your RGB channels. You have a lot of shades of color. When you're shooting video with an H.264 codec, which is the codec that you're using on Canon cameras and Nikon cameras, it's only an 8-bit codec. So you're just using 256 shades of red, green, and blue. You have many fewer colors from white to black. And also the size of your video color space. In stills, you're shooting RAW, but in video, you're shooting this limited space called Rec. 709. So what does this mean to you shooting video? You have fewer colors that you're working with, and you have fewer steps from black to white between the colors. And that's going to affect the images that you create. So let's talk a little bit about the codecs that get used most in cinema production. On the high end, in some better cinema cameras, we have these higher visual quality codecs. Two names you'll probably know is ProRes, which is an Apple QuickTime, or is an Apple proprietary codec, and DNxHD, which is what Avid, the cinema editing software Avid uses as their codec. These are higher bit depth codecs. They record at 10-bit, sometimes even 12-bit, so they have really good color reproduction. They are iframe codecs, which means they compress one frame at a time. These codecs were designed for editorial, so that each individual, you could drop the scissors or drop the cut anywhere in an edit, and each frame would stand on its own and have fewer video artifacts. And what's bad about them is they're bigger. They're larger, so you need more camera processor power speed if you're going to record with them. So you couldn't really record with these types of codecs on board onto your CF card with your DSLR camera. The codecs are simply too big. The processor can't handle them. So that's why we use on Canon cameras and Nikon cameras basically a version of MPEG-4 called H.264. And that is a group of frame codec, at least on the Canon 5D Mark II it is. Now what's great about it, smaller files. What does that let you do? That lets you shoot video right to the CF card on the camera, which is one of the things that's great about a DSLR. You can keep that small form factor, small files, small media to record on, keeps the whole package small. Now what's bad about it is we're shooting lower bit depth and the color reproduction is worse. And like I said, it's a group of frame compression. So these are the things that are working for or against you. So now let's go back and look again at this spot, and let's look at it with this information about codec and bit depth in mind. So I kind of like to call this something of an inelastic image. When you're shooting with a DSLR with video, anybody who's tried to pull a video clip shot with a DSLR into a color correction software, like maybe you're using something like, the color corrector in Final Cut, or maybe you're using SpeedGrade in Adobe CS6, or some other color correction, you'll find that you don't have to stretch an 8-bit video signal very far before it starts to fall apart and get electronic looking. That's also happening in the camera. So, but for instance, I'm going to go here in the commercial around, say, second 15. This shot, Now, you know that if you flipped the exact same camera, the 5D Mark II, over to RAW mode and shot a still of this, you'd have way more latitude than this. I know some of this, crunchiness is from, the web video you're looking at, but you'd have more latitude here. You'd be holding more detail in the shadow and in the sunlight. This is a function of the compression. You've got merely less, you've got less space and less latitude. Also, if we scroll forward a little more to, I believe, second 25, same thing is happening here. And with those lens flares and with that backlit white snow, you'd be holding more detail if you were shooting RAW. So this is another one that I like to look at at 32 seconds in the commercial. Look at this shot. If we were shooting RAW stills, you'd be seeing more detail in these guys' faces in the foreground. You know that the background back there, the sky and the water, the detail will be holding much, much better. These are all, all of these examples I've shown you are partial functions of shooting with lower bit depth. So now let's talk a little bit about how the color space affects things. I'm going to scroll now to about second 30 seconds in the commercial now. Here's this nice airplane shot. And look over here, and you see like in the sky area here, the blue can look kind of scissored out in some of these skies. We have fewer shades from white to black, so the blue can get a little electronic. And if you tried to pump this up, the saturation up at all in post, you'd have a real difficult time getting good clean blue out of this. Also, again here at the 45-second mark, 45 seconds, same thing here. Notice how the blues in the skies, they look a little clipped, a little crunched, a little flat. Because we have fewer steps from white to black there, the blue starts getting kind of snarly looking. So now let's take a look at this in terms of the codec that you're using. At 34 seconds, remember what I said with the iframe codecs, or the group of frame codecs, how you have one key frame, then it's comparing? This sequence here, this little hockey skating sequence here, I'm going to play it. There's a lot of motion here. The camera is never really holding still. So from frame to frame, I'll try to play it again here. From frame to frame, everything in the frame is moving. Every single pixel is changing. So how does that show itself? Look here at how sort of chunky and blurry everything gets. The codec is trying so hard to compare one frame to the next, but everything is changing, and the whole codec kind of breaks down a little bit, and things get very blocky and chunky looking. In shots where every single frame is substantially different one frame to the next, these codecs will really struggle. They'll have a hard time holding good sharpness, and things will get blocky and chunky, begin to break down. And if you've ever seen that happen on cable TV, like when you're watching television and an action sequence will look sort of blocky, it's because essentially what's coming over your cable TV pipe is or wire is essentially a version of this MPEG-4 stream. So these are all some various things that happen with when you're shooting with a codec that's got a fairly inelastic image. So what can we do about this? When we've got an inelastic image, how do we fix it? How can we make it better? Well, Canon has a good idea. They want you to buy a new camera. They have created, and not to throw any shade on them, they've done a beautiful job. They've got in their camera an all-eye mode in the Canon 5D Mark II. They've actually created a new mode in the codec where you can choose. I'll shoot all IPB group of frame codecs, or I can shoot all I. This will result in a bigger file, and it'll have fewer minutes of video before you fill up a card, but your quality will be greatly improved. This will also make it easier to ingest this footage and edit this footage. Canon has also created a much more substantial line of cameras above the 5D, the C300, and other cameras, but that's a conversation for another day and another webinar. So what's Nikon done to try to help this issue of having a somewhat inelastic image? They have taken a different tack, and I think a very interesting tack. Whereas on a Canon camera, the HDMI port on the side of the camera has got the autofocus, little white squares that, the sort of autofocus grid that you see on the digital viewfinder on the back. On the Nikon D800 and also on the D4, the HDMI out is clean. There's no frame lines or anything on it. And what that allows you to do is record it. And Nikon has decided that's the path that they think is best. And you can connect an HDMI-based recorder. This little unit you see on top of the camera here is called an Atomos Ninja. I think it's Atomos or Atomos. I don't know how the company pronounces its name. This is a combination monitor and ProRes recorder. And there are many different types of these, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But essentially, it's a monitor plus an SSD solid-state card stuck into the back of it that allows you to record at higher codecs, at more high-quality codecs. And there are many different ones, which I will name and discuss in a little while. But this is the direction that Nikon has decided to go in order to give you better, cleaner, higher bit depth codecs. That's the route that they've chosen. In general, the CMOS sensors are improving a lot, but this is the road that Canon's chosen to go. So now let's talk about the sensor a little bit. And most people have seen this. Take a look at this image or this video as it rolls by. What do you notice about it? You notice immediately that a lot of the verticals are off. I know there's a wind blowing in the shot, but the trees are leaning to the left. The fence poles are leaning to the left. Everything that's going by in front of the camera, the train, is leaning to the left. The short answer is this is a sensor that's designed to take stills. And what it does is it takes the top line of information first, and the second and the third. And this is basically what's called a rolling shutter artifact. And I'm sure any of you who shot video know all about this, but I need to mention it for those of you who perhaps have not. So this is something that shows up all the time in DSLR cinematography. It's a bit of an issue for people. So let's go back and look at this spot again. And there are a few in particular I'd really like you to have a look at. Have a look on this spot. Starting here from basically 5 seconds to 8 seconds in here. These people sitting around the fire. Watch this, but notice the sort of jiggle and wobble that is happening in their faces. They look a little jello-y, right? That is exactly this rolling shutter thing, but it's being compounded by the fact that it's being shot on a long lens. The shake of the cameraman's actual hands is accentuating this wobble and making it worse. Here's another one in here, by the way. This guy here, the guy with the moose antlers here at 24, this shot here, same thing's going on there. Long lens. It's a short shot, but you see the shake and wobble that's inherent in it. This is a function of the CMOS sensor just having some jiggle in it because of the way that it acquires an image. So what can we do about that? I mean, what's great about having a camera you can move freely, but it's wobbly, you want to be able to have the camera stable, but you also want the freedom to move around and shoot. Like, for instance, when Bruce shot this, he was using what's on the left, the Z Finder, which some of you may know. It's a little thing made by Zacuto that allows you to look at the LCD monitor on the back of the camera more closely. Or on the right now, they have a digital viewfinder, an EVF. But that's a small package, a handheld package. And when you get on a long lens, your body starts to shake, and you're only shooting at 1/50th of a frame a second, so things can get shaky. So what can we do to make this better? Well, like I said, Canon and Nikon have both vastly improved their CMOS sensors in their newer versions of the cameras. That's one thing. But another thing is the way in which you hold and move the camera. There are many really good stabilizing tools. There's better handheld rigs. There's Steadicam and gyro rigs, and we'll talk greatly about these in a bit. But here's a handheld rig, which is basically just adding on some hand grips and basically making a larger, more stabilized rig. Steadicam, which is an inertia-based system that helps things glide out and operate more smoothly. And there are also certain gyro rigs and other rigs, which are basically built to create more camera stability. So in handheld situations, they'll work better. So these are some things that we'll talk about that you can use, rigs you can use that will help cure this wobbly, jiggly image issue that you have with DSLR cameras. So let's talk a bit quickly about exposure here. This clip here was shot by Hugh Sitton, who is a Corbis Stills contributor, prolific photographer, shoots amazing stuff, who has begun to shoot motion, and I think he took a trip to Morocco recently, and these are some dervishes that he shot there. I just pulled this clip into Premiere, and just to be fair to Hugh, this is like one outtake. A lot of his, the rest of his stuff is beautiful and rock solid. And if Hugh, you're listening, I'm not picking on you. It was a really good example to illustrate what I'm talking about. Because you're only shooting an 8-bit image and compressing it, DSLR video does not hold overexposure very well. And as you can see here on the waveform monitor, this detail is blown out up here in this top across the waveform monitor. You can see it's all clipped. When detail is gone, it's gone. So err on the side of underexposure when you're exposing your images. you can see in the shadow area here beneath the guy's twirling skirts that there's still enough detail there that you could have stopped down on this some more. So if you're going to err on the side of under, not over, because when it clips, it clips. And you also will find that erring on the side of undersaturation as opposed to oversaturation will also help preserve the quality of your images. So how do we do this? There's a tool in most DSLRs that I really, really like that I actually use while I'm shooting. In their live view mode, when you're viewing the video over the camera, most of them, and I did this because I have a 5D Mark II at home. This is a shot out my back door into my backyard using the histogram mode. So what happens with my camera is you hit the info button. I'll play this little video here. And when you can see I'm overexposed here. So you shoot in manual mode. I always like to shoot in manual mode with my camera. Hit the info button once, twice, brings up that data on the left, and the third time you hit it, brings up the histogram, live view. And as I dial the exposure up and as I dial the exposure down, that histogram is showing me what I've got. And when you've got that nice mountain in the middle exposure right there that I'm going to pause on, when you've got this nice mountain in the middle exposure, you know you're in the correct ballpark. Now, I know this is a bit rough way to expose. You'll find your own way. And I also know that having all this junk on the frame while you're recording, all this graphic image, is a bit of a pain framing a decent-looking shot. But if you're heading into a situation where you don't know what you're getting, you're shooting in a more documentary style, you're moving pretty quickly, and you don't know how it's going to go, I use this mode very, very frequently because I can dial my exposure as I go and trust that I'm in a good place. When you're outside shooting in the bright sunlight, it's hard to see that monitor sometimes, and having this as a quick fallback is a way to go. Obviously, you can continue to expose the way you always have with a light meter or however it is you choose to do it, but this is a mode that I really prefer and I recommend highly when you're beginning shooting motion to make sure you've got your exposures not clipping at the top, not clipping at the bottom, pretty rock solid. So lastly, let's talk a little bit about, lastly on the technical side, let's talk a little bit about some cinema-style setups of equipment, which basically gets you to a point of doing some clean, basic operation of a camera when you're shooting motion subjects. And a lot of this, I'm sure a lot of you will already know, but bits like tripods and heads, matte boxes and follow focuses, and monitors. Some of this may be for those of you who have not yet shot any motion, but there'll be some hopefully interesting stuff in here for everybody. So if I had a Canon stills camera and a bag of lenses, and I wanted to begin shooting motion, and I was thinking, what's the first piece of equipment that I would get in order to improve how I do my job? A monitor of some sort would be the first thing that I personally would pick. Again, this is my opinion, but this is what I would get first. There are a large number of small LCD monitors out there from 4 inches to 8 inches that allow you to do one really important thing, which is to see focus well. When you're focusing these cameras, you're going, if you're just using the camera, off that little monitor on the back. And I can't tell you when I first started using mine how many times I buzzed focus in shots, particularly when I'm trying to pull focus with a moving subject. So a larger monitor, or up here at the top, this small one here is made by a company called Small HD. It's an HD4. And it's got a little eye cup on it that has a little loop in it, essentially, that amplifies your view of it. Or this is a Small HD DP6. I have one of these monitors. I think it's great. And it shows your focus very, very cleanly, and it really improves your ability to see focus. And some of them even have got, like this Astro one here, have got some waveform monitor and video scope or vector scope functions. So here's a few different brands, and I'll mention some more of them. But Small HD is an excellent company. Zacuto makes a similar small viewfinder called a Z-Finder EVF. And Marshall and Astro are two companies that also produce very good quality monitors that have HDMI inputs, going from a small HDMI, mini HDMI out of the camera up there. So if I could buy one piece of gear, this is the first thing I'd put my money in to improve my operating. Now, as I mentioned before in regards to Nikon cameras, monitor recorder combinations are also a great investment. Because it allows you to view on the monitor function, but actually use it as a recorder to record ProRes and on some of them DNx HD. Now bear in mind, it's still an 8-bit signal coming out of the camera. So it's not going to magically give you 10 bits worth of quality off the camera, but what it does is record in these 10-bit codecs to get you, at least when it's recording, a slightly broader color space, but also a nice, solid, large frame, iframe codec that you can immediately pull into editorial. Lots of people are doing this. And some very popular brands. These, Cinedec makes an excellent one called the Extreme. Atomos makes the Ninja 2. Convergent Designs makes the Gemini. And Sound Designs makes the Pix 240. These are all excellent recorders, and you get a monitor in it for the bargain. And what's also great about these is they move from camera to camera to camera. You rent a better camera. You rent a different camera. You borrow a buddy's camera. You upgrade in 3 years. These monitors will travel with you. There are a lot of high-definition video shooters out there who bought, F900 video cameras or something 10, 15 years ago, who are getting second life out of them by, instead of shooting to videotape, using these recorders and recording out of the SDI outputs on their video cameras. So some support accessories. I won't talk too much about these, but this is the next thing I would get into. A good fluid head and a good tripod is a really key thing. They're basically hydraulically dampened. I'm sure all of you have seen them and can see them at most of your, most still shops. I know that out here, that at Calumet and Sammy's, there are tons of these now. So I won't go into these at too great a depth. Your mileage may vary. Check out which one you want. But Sackler and Vinton and O'Connor all make excellent DV-sized heads. This is the next thing I get into, just to be able to operate your shots smoothly. Matte boxes and follow focuses, and again, I won't dwell on this too much because we've got a lot of ground to cover in an hour. Matte boxes obviously are good for filtration and keeping the lens free of flares, but follow focuses are and that's this little geared gadget over here for those of you who don't know. These are important because particularly on stills lenses, racking from close focus to infinity isn't much of a turn on the barrel. And when you grab the lens physically with your hand and turn it, you're shaking the camera as you're changing the focus. The ability to change focus while shooting is a major cinema function, and a follow focus gets you a long way towards smoothing that out. It has a gear that engages, and I'll show you a picture in a minute. But Red Rock is a company that makes a lot of these, and Zacuto is another company that makes a lot of these different gadgets. And like I said, you'll have this in the link sheet at the end, so don't worry much about it. But these are some other basic pieces of equipment that could get you from having a stills camera, a DSLR, to a more robust cinema-style operating package. So, okay, hopefully that wasn't too much technical gear, techno stuff. Let's try to shift our heads a little bit now and think a little more creatively and talk a little bit more about how we move the camera and not only what the purpose of moving a camera is, but the tools that you'll use to move the camera. Now, we can't really teach an entire course in cinematography and all the different various effective ways of camera movement, in the 30 minutes I have left. But I'm going to try to hit on some high points that will help you understand, from a starting point of view, some ways that you can move the camera in these choices. So let's take a look at this clip here. This is shot by a guy named Duncan Frazier, who is a contributor here at Corbis Motion, shoots beautiful, beautiful work, travels all over the world. And I picked this particular shot because to me, this looks like a still photograph. It's like a still photograph, except what's in it happens to be moving. So as a departure point for people who are stills photographers, you're all about making that one frame that tells the story. I think this frame does it very well. It's a very serene moment. It's a very calm moment. It's a very mellow, reflective moment. And in this particular instance, not moving the camera is, in my opinion, the right choice about moving the camera. Sometimes leaving it where it is the right choice, because that's the emotion, that's the feeling that's going on in this image. It's sort of more serene, more tranquil, tells the story better. But let's move forward, because this is not the only way to go. One more time, let's take a look at this commercial. But this time, let's think about it creatively. What feeling are we creating here with our cinematography? In this spot, and watch it again, and even maybe turn up the music here a little bit this time. But watch it. What feeling are we getting here? The point of this is to be free, is to be present, to be another person in the group. The idea is, like the sort of overall feeling that Bruce is going for here, for here is one of like documentary reality, being there yourself, being one of the people in the group, to be very present and very spontaneous. It's not staged. It's not graphic composition by any means. It's not precious. It's meant to feel very light and free-floating. And one of the reasons that he loved using a small camera for a commercial like this is how quickly you can just take it and go and be spontaneous. So there's a spontaneity and freedom happening here that I think is really great. It's one of the things that I love about this commercial, and one of the reasons that I frankly forgive all of the little technical blurps and mistakes and technical glitches we talked about in the first half of this talk, because it moves so fast and flows so well. Another thing to ask yourself is how many different kinds of camera motion are there here? We've got handheld. This is shot from a truck, maybe off a tripod. We're handheld through the woods. That's a Steadicam shot. Handheld. Vehicle, shooting off a train. We're shooting from all different manners of platforms here. He's moving the camera in really basic traditional ways. Varieties of handheld, but using vehicles, all different sorts of things. And this is an airplane shot. And there's even one in here where he's skating, like the hockey stuff. Here, Bruce is on ice skates. He's skating after the guys. So you don't need to have a lot of fancy equipment and high-tech equipment in order to create motion and impetus and excitement and energy to what you're shooting. Like notice this is a very simple thing here that I'm just going to point out to you. You can look at around 51 seconds in the shot. Just a really simple, quick point. As we dolly from left to right, these little lights in the foreground. Notice how these little lights in the foreground kind of blow by? He's just following this line of lights and having a bit of foreground, and there's also a line of lights behind them. Having a little bit of visual interest like that moves on a plane gives the shot a lot more action and a lot more pace. So there's a lot of different great handheld in here. So I'm going to editorialize a little now, and this is a rig that I've used. This is basically my little rig that I've built. You can go to rental houses or stores and buy your own particular pieces, but these are the pieces that I've chosen because they work well for me. What I've got here is I've just got my Canon camera and the lens, and I bought this little strip here. It's like a little zip tie strip that has focus gears on it, and I put a follow focus on there, and there's a base plate in there with some iris rods, you can see. Got a little pistol grip here in my hand. And then this is a 6-inch small HD monitor with a hood on it and a little flex arm grip made by Zacuto. And you can buy, I'm not editorializing for one company or another. You can see I have a Zacuto flex arm, but a Red Rock follow focus. There are many different types. This is just what I've put together. But what I like about this rig is the way I can operate it. I take that little monitor and tuck it up against my chest, pull my elbows in close, grab the focus handle with my left hand and the grip with my right, look down to the monitor, and it's light and it's small, and I can fit into the front seat of a car, I can fit into a corner, I can tuck myself into a lot of spaces. I actually built this rig to start with as a director's finder working on a cinema shoot when we're lining up the next shot. We used to have we still have PL mount lenses that go onto director's finders, but I started using this. And then we'd use it and go, wow, this is really nice. And then we'd shoot, okay, let's shoot a shot for the commercial with it. And then we shoot another shot for a commercial with it. And the next commercial we'd use it some more. And this is basically what happened in the DSLR world. For those of you who have not spent a lot of time on cinema sets, is varieties of these kinds of rigs are what exploded when the DSLRs really took off. I like this rig because I can improvise. If I'm doing a documentary type thing, I can improvise. For example, from this physical position here, I can just tip my head up, talk to somebody if I'm interviewing them, look back down, and I can also see all around myself, see my focus, and move very freely. Like I just sort of tip my head down, and I can look inside the monitor there, as you can see what's happening in the monitor. The other thing I like about this rig, with the use of this flex arm, is I can change the position of the monitor relative to the camera. So say, for instance, all I have to do is loosen that little red knuckle, and the arm changes shape, and I can retighten it and go into a low mode or a high mode. Like right now, I'm holding the camera at my knee level, and it just took me a few seconds to flip that over. Actually, I flipped the camera upside down in this shot. The camera's just upside down, and the monitor's tipped the other way. And I'm just going to take the video image and flip it when I'm editing it. And really quickly, you can get from high mode to low mode. So if you're working in a documentary-style, one-man band kind of way, I think that these types of setups, I prefer them. You're like you might like using a Z finder looking straight in the back, And again, your mileage may vary, but there's a lot of ability to customize here and make what you like for yourself. So now, let's talk about doing handheld in a slightly more cinema style. Now, I look at these pictures, and my first thought is I kind of laugh a little bit, because if you look at this top image here, there's this little tiny camera and this lens and all this other stuff attached to it. In certain ways, you've taken what's nice about a small camera and made it big again. But what you can do is make your handheld more stable, particularly on long lenses. And this is important, particularly when you're doing dramatic style stuff. You're shooting narrative stories and you're working with actors. And for those of you who have not been on cinema sets and know how the crew works, this guy over here with the beard and the baseball hat, our camera assistant, he's basically doing the focus pulling. And if you take a look in this rig, this little unit up here by the operator's ear, this is made by Preston. It's called a FIZ, a Fizz, focus iris zoom control. And it's a little controller of this little motor here. There is a motor on that lens. And the assistant's got a wireless control. And he's pulling focus remotely for the operator. And again, this may be basic for some of you, but in the cinema world, the operator operates and the assistant pulls focus, because keeping a moving actor in focus at all times is one of the key things about cinema. So what you have here is a rig that's nicely balanced, better for long takes, better for action that you've blocked, and you sort of have a better, you're not improvising quite so much, you kind of know where you're going a little more, and the premium is on camera stability, camera smoothness while being handheld, but still able to maintain that sort of nimble handheld nature to the shot, more of a POV kind of thing. So basically a smoother, more solid handheld, because for a lot of you, handheld is going to be the first types of motion that you shoot, because you're coming from a background where you're shooting with a camera in your hands a lot of the time. And let's take a look at this clip, which is shot by a guy named Brad Walker, who owns a company called Lighthouse. And Brad is a frequent contributor here at Corbis Motion, shoots a lot of beautiful work. And I will say that this shot is not shot with a DSLR, it's shot with an Alexa, but the concept of handheld is the same. And I picked this sequence because this sequence is a mix of handheld, but also dolly shot. And dolly will be our next topic, and I'll sort of point out which is which as we go along here. So I'm just going to play this clip, and there's some handheld in here. A lot of these sort of first-person things are handheld. But notice that the handheld is longer, a lot of it's longer lens, and not nearly as shaky and jumpy and not frenetic, but energy-packed as the Molson commercial that we've watched. But it's still smooth. It allows you to move and flow smoothly and easily and freely through a crowd, and the assistant is able to pull focus for you, being independent from you. So there's a mixture, like I said, of handheld and dolly in here, and I'll point out the dolly shots to you as well. But in terms of handheld, this is a pretty good example of shooting smooth handheld work, where you can move through a crowd and be more nimble and still keep that feeling. So let's talk a little bit now about dolly shots. The point of a dolly shot, I'm sure all of you have seen these, is to be a very simple but solid setup that you can operate off of a great deal. This here is actually a still from that shoot that Brad's doing. That's Brad on the dolly there. Here's his focus assistant or his camera assistant pulling focus. Here's a dolly grip pushing what is a very, very cheap, very inexpensive doorway dolly. It's basically just a platform with wheels and some skate wheels underneath and track. This is the same kind of rig that I was using to shoot, dolly shots in, student films. Very inexpensive, but allows you to move somewhat smoothly and on a long lens. So for a lot of you, this type of rig might be your first venture into doing dolly shots. And the whole point is just to be able to move smoothly with a long lens. And what I'll do now is point out in this clip here a few of the shots that are actually dolly shots. Actually, let me jump back here. Notice, this is that scene where we're looking at the backs of a lot of people's heads, and the guitarist is up here, and he's very strongly backlit. I believe that's that sequence there. So here there'll be shots like, where's my guy here? I think it's 31 seconds. Oh, here. Like this sequence here. There's our guitarist. These shots in here, like 27, 28 seconds, when you see the guitarist's face, and we're sort of moving slowly right to left, you'll see that those are dolly shots. Like I'm playing along right now, 21, 22 seconds. like 27, 28 seconds. All those shots of the guitarist where there's people moving by left to right, those are all long lens dolly shots. You're shooting that at 100, 120 millimeter lens, maybe longer, but still maintaining that feeling of left to right drift, creating some energy and creating some foreground and background motion, but not shaky, not jumpy, pretty smooth, and allows you to focus on one thing. And this sparkler shot at the end here, same thing, dolly. You see how the building in the background is sort of shifting along. So this is a really nice, I think, combination in this spot of handheld work and smooth dolly work. So in terms of dollies, there are many, many different varieties of types of dollies, but the concepts are the same. On the left here we see just a guy with, the simplest setup with track and a little skateboard dolly, and it's one person pushing a camera. On the right is a much larger cinema setup, and I picked this shot on the right because it's actually got two dollies from the two major manufacturers. The one on the right is, I believe, a Pee-wee, a Fisher. I can't tell if it's a Pee-wee or a hybrid, but it looks like a Pee-wee, made by Chapman. And then on the left is a JL Fisher 10 dolly. And the point of these things is they're physically large. They have a lot of mass, so you can move them very smoothly. And as you push them, they'll glide, and there's basically zero motion at all. You can just float the camera left to right. You can also boom up and down, and there's room for an assistant as well as an operator on the dolly. One of the things you'll find yourself doing in dolly shots is you'll be trying to, as you block your action with your actors, match the movement of the cameras to the actors, or let the actors be influencing the movement. Like when the actor moves from point A to point B, you're dollying with them. And a lot of times you'll be hiding your pans, hiding your tilts, and if you're zooming, hiding your zooms, and hiding your boom motions up and down in the dolly move. So it sort of all looks like one big movement. I've actually had this happen to me several times, like shooting dramatic scenes in films where, we're all set up, we've rehearsed it, we've got the whole shot set up, and the director says action, and then we roll it, and I'm sitting here wondering, why aren't we moving? Why aren't we moving? And he'll say cut, and I'll turn to the dolly grip and say, what happened? Why didn't you move? And I'll look, and we'll be at the end of the dolly track. And we've all got it coordinated so nicely and smoothly that you don't even feel it, you don't even sense it. It just sort of all blends together and happens. And when you start getting that kind of feeling, you know something's happening right, because the move becomes almost unnoticeable and organic, but it still adds energy. And again, we can't teach a whole course in cinematography here, but this is the type of thing that you're doing when you're blocking dramatic scenes with a dolly. So a mini version of this is something called a slider. And this is basically just a small linear bearing dolly. You can move, 3 to 6 feet. There are motorized ones and mechanical ones. There are a million of them out there on the market right now. And companies like Kessler that makes cranes has got a very nice motorized one. There's a lot of time-lapse guys using motorized ones. This basically just gets you like 3 feet worth of slide, and it's a small one-man setup. And basically what they're meant to do is do this. Let me see if I'm playing here now. Basically the camera moves slowly across a sliding linear bed, and you get a little bit of drift. And you can use these tools for, whatever you choose. But this is the point of using these kind of sliders. They're inexpensive tools. There are a ton of them out there. I have links to Kessler on the link page. But if you are, looking for some sort of very slow, smooth type movement, sliders are a very interesting way to go. So here's a different kind of dolly. And I'm going to editorialize a little bit here and say I love this piece of equipment and I use it a lot. This is made by a German company called PS Technik, and this is called a skater dolly. And for those of you who do tabletop work, this is a really great little gadget. I love this thing. It's essentially 3 very smooth skate wheels, and each one of these 3 circles, how it says A, B, and C, you can see sort of like degrees on a compass. You're able to reorient these things. Like right now they're set up so all 3 wheels are in a line, but you can turn all 3 of these wheels in separate, unconnected directions and make straight moves, curved moves, pivoting moves. And then there's this little rocker plate that you can not really tilt in shot, but you can lock it in place. And basically, if you have a smooth surface to work on, do really great little moves with this. Now this is actually a skater's reel that I'm going to play for you here. And hopefully it's not too choppy, but it's very nice because it sort of shows the setup. And for anyone who's doing tabletop work and learning to add motion and movement to their tabletop work, or here in a dramatic scene, these guys, they're literally dollying on nothing simpler than a piece of ABX plywood. This is a wonderful little tool. It's very smooth. Again, I have to emphasize, it's predicated on a smooth surface. But for product photography, this is a very effective tool. I've used this. I've done several commercials for Mattel, and the subject matter is always a kid on the floor with a toy, and we just cast, we pick our location with a hardwood floor and have the kid down on the floor playing with the toy and just skate right along. And you can see this reel on PS Technic's website. That's a good one there, dollying down this tunnel. So this is a very small, clever little take on this on the skateboard dolly concept. And I find it to be a wonderful tool. I've used it a lot. Some of you, if you ever use periscopes or borescopes, you can use it in conjunction with those. But it's a very lovely little tool. So I want to editorialize a little and put that one out there for you. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about larger camera movement. Steadicam. For those of you who do know what this is, forgive me for going on about it, but for those of you who don't, Steadicam is basically an inertial system. What happens is the operator is wearing a vest. There is, as you can see here, a mechanically spring-loaded arm, similar in concepts like an architect's lamp arm. There's, it's a parallelogram with springs inside, and then a sled that has a camera, a post, and a gimbal joint, and monitors and batteries at the bottom. And the whole point here is to access the center of gravity of the camera with the rig, and then isolate out the vibration with the vest and the arm. And what it allows you to do is basically float the camera in space. Notice this guy on the right here isn't even touching it. The camera just stays there. And I'm sure all of you have seen Steadicam operators, but I just wanted to sort of explain the few concepts for those of you who haven't. Notice the guy on the left here, camera's on the bottom, guy on the right, camera's on the top. But the whole purpose here is to float. And there are various varieties of this type of rig made by Steadicam and other functions. Now, this piece of video here, the man in this clip is Garrett Brown, who's actually the inventor of the Steadicam. And he, the first Steadicam shot he did was in Rocky when Sylvester Stallone runs up the stairs. Garrett invented this. This is unfortunately the best copy of this video I could find. Please go to the links page when we're done and watch this and see it more smoothly. But this is really nice. Garrett is who you're seeing on camera, and there's another guy named Dan Neese, who is a veteran Steadicam operator. And this is a small Steadicam. This is not a big pro one. This is called the Steadicam Pilot. It is sort of a trimmed-down version. You'll notice he's got, I think, some manner of Panasonic video camera on here. But you can see from this video the type of fluid flow you can get. And he'll demonstrate a little bit about operating and how to balance it. But I encourage you when we're done here to go to the links page and get this clip. But it gives you a basic feel for what's going on with the Steadicam shot. And it's used to great effect in television and such. But this is, I think, a very nice little demo piece here. So now, here's a clip, a Steadicam clip shot by another Corbis contributor, a guy named David Fortney. For those of you familiar with the Terrence Malick film, Tree of Life, it was loaded with really beautiful nature stills and nature cinema. David Fortney shot that for Terrence Malick. David is a contributor here at Corbis Motion. We're very proud to have him. His work is of a very high quality, and he goes out to various places all over the world and shoots these kind of slow, strong, dramatic nature shots using a underslung Steadicam for many of them. If you go onto CorbisMotion.com, you can search by owner for David Fortney's work and see David's work. This is just one example. But this is how you get something that's very rock solid and very smooth in a distant location where you can't drag a dolly and track. So this is just another example of what can be done with Steadicam. Now, there are miniature versions, too, for those of us who are on a budget, which is probably most of us. For example, this is a Steadicam Merlin, and I've got a Steadicam Merlin link in the link sheet as well. But it's basically a handheld inertial device. You can see on the left that one can just hold it by hand, or on the right it's got a small arm and vest. I mean, your mileage may vary. Again, the amount of money you spend and the amount of time you take to learn how to use it is going to affect your quality. The stronger arms are going to balance better. But in general, you can begin to smooth your shots out using these types of tools. And again, you can find these at many different photo stores and cinema rental houses. But look into these as a possibility for you starting to move the camera more smoothly. So let's talk a little bit about moving the camera different ways. I mean, pretty much all of us have at least got a bicycle, a motorcycle, a car, a truck, a boat, some kind of vehicle. This is another excellent way to move the camera. There is a myriad of different rigging devices, which I'm sure those of you who are car shooters have used to shoot automotive car stills. But, variations on suction cups and rigs. You can mount all sorts of different ways. And this is a way to move a camera that a lot of you have accessible to you right now. But beware. The shutter shake issue we talked about, the jello shutter, the rolling shutter artifact issues that we talked about, they'll really show up here, because you have to remember, the vehicle has got an engine. That engine's making vibration. The road surface makes vibration. The suspension of the vehicle makes vibration. The longer lens amplifies the vibration. So test first and make sure that your rig is smooth enough and your road is smooth enough if you're just going to rig onto a car. So here's another little video clip. This is a very simple example of a rig shot. This is just a suction cup rig attached to the hood of a car. But there's some bump in there. It's pretty smooth. There's some bump. There's some shake. Whenever the vehicle's chassis shakes, the shot shakes too. But that's a pretty quick and smooth way to add a lot of energy and a lot of life to your cinema. So, I personally think that the first thing that you should have to do the first day you shoot your first film is to shoot a scene in a car, because it presents you with a number of different challenges about moving the camera and how to rig and basically, how to deal with a frame where every single piece of it is moving all the time. Now, this is the last piece of equipment I'm going to show you, because I'm just about on time, I think, here. This is a rig I'm going to editorialize a little bit and say I think is very, very interesting. For those of you stills photographers who perhaps have shot sports or perhaps have shot boat to boat, anyone who's ever used a gyro, like a Kenyan gyro, which is basically a stabilizing device, just a gyroscope. It's essentially, for those of you who don't know what a gyro is, it's essentially a very elaborate top, the same way that a child's top will spin and stay standing because of the spinning motion. That's what a gyroscope does. And a lot of, there was a time when lots of stills sports photographers who were doing really long lens work might attach a gyro to the bottom of the lens to smooth it out. And there's a company called Tyler who made a lot of helicopter rigs. They made nose mounts, they made side mounts that were gyro-stabilized rigs. Now, I mentioned this rig to you because Tyler, the company Tyler, because they do aerials, tend to be based out of airports all over the world, working with helicopter pilots. And they rent this small rig here, and this is called the Tyler Mini Gyro. If you look at this picture here, inside this little housing are two gyros tipped at 45-degree angles, but they're at 90-degree angles to one another. You can see it in this picture here. Inside this housing is a gyro, one pointing up, one pointing down. But then the guy in the helicopter here, this little post underneath, it's basically just a gas spring shock, like on a car. And then there's just two handles for the operator to hold it. You can orient. And over here on the right, the way this is set up is they've flipped the handles upside down, removed the spring, and they're using it as a handheld rig. The gyroscopes hugely stabilize the camera. I mean, for any of you who, perhaps if you haven't used one, every tank turret is gyroscopically stabilized. You can imagine driving a tank across rough terrain and trying to shoot at 50 miles an hour. The tanks themselves, the entire turret portion of the tank, is stabilized by gyroscopes, getting it to plane out and be smooth underneath a very, very rough operating chassis. So that's the principle, is to have inertia want to hold the camera in place. So I mentioned this rig because it rents for about $400 a day, and Tyler's got subsidiaries in many big cities at the airport. And you can rent this little rig and basically turn most vehicles into some kind of poor man's camera car. You can shoot car to car with this. You can shoot out the back of a minivan or out the side of a door with it. Here's an example where some guys are shooting off the back of a motorcycle going bike to bike. As you move up and start shooting bigger cinema things, there are task-specific camera cars built to shoot car to car. But this is a very handy little, relatively inexpensive tool to get you out on the road and taking a shaky, bumpy platform and making it smoother for handheld use. So the link to Tyler Mini Gyro is definitely in that link sheet as well. And here is a little video clip. This is off their reel. It's not a particularly great piece of video, but it illustrates the point. We're shooting from one vehicle to another vehicle here. Then here we have a shot of the thing itself. Now look how shaky this guy's shot is. But look how smooth this one is. And when you zoom in, the shot remains pretty smooth for two cars moving over medium pavement at a decent speed. If you ever try to shoot a long lens version of this shot right here, out of one car to another, you'll know how difficult this can be because both vehicles have motion, both vehicles have bounce, and the ability to smooth and stabilize that is really key. So that is a personal favorite of mine, the Tyler Mini Gyro, for quickly and inexpensively stabilizing a camera. So that is, it's a little after 9, and that is sort of the end of my creative part of the talk. And there's one other thing, and hopefully some of that's been helpful to you. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you are interested, being Corbis Stills contributors, interested to know, well, this is a field I want to get into, or I have, and I've begun to shoot. I'd like to become a motion contributor at Corbis. These are the thoughts that I would hope to leave you with on this subject. Is number one, if you're interested to begin contributing motion to Corbis, and we hope you are, that you take a good hard look at your work and truly feel that you are shooting motion at a professional level, that you'd be proud to show the clips that you would show to us, to any one of your clients who basically pay your rent. We're looking for good, top quality work. If you take a look at the Brad Walker work and the David Fortney work, you're in very good company here submitting motion to Corbis Motion. So we need basically your best, most solid professional work. It'd be great if you had built up a body of work. Some of you are just beginning. Some of you have been doing it for a while. But hopefully you've got to the point where you've got at least 50 clips that you're proud of and you would like to show us to consider licensing. And it would be good that you yourself have made a decision that I'd like to make motion a substantial part of my business, that I have a bit of a dedication to continue shooting motion and not just have it be a one-off thing for you, but to be a move that you'd like to make. And theoretically, if you're here listening to this presentation, that's probably pretty possible. And so what you do is take those clips, post them to Vimeo, get a Vimeo. If you don't have a Vimeo account, get one, or whatever web page you use, and let us know about them. Email motioncontributors@corbis.com and send us those clips and let us have a look, and we can begin to talk.